Welcome to Trib Talk. It's a special election voting edition of Trib Talk. Joining me today are Sherrie Swensen, the Salt Lake County Clerk, and Justin Lee, who's the Director of the Elections Division for the Lieutenant Governor's Office. The reason we're bringing these two together today is, elections right around the corner. Ballots should be hitting your mailbox soon. There's been so much discussion about the issues surrounding the mail-in voting. These guys have a little bit more experience. We have a little bit more experience here in Utah, but we wanted to talk about some of those issues. So let's start with when should voters expect to start seeing their ballots arrive if they haven't already? Justin, do you want to take that first one?
Really any time at this point. We've already received reports of ballots being received in several counties across the state. In some different parts of the same county, it may take a day or two depending on the mail times. But ballots could be there anytime and will continue arriving throughout this week.
Yeah. Sherrie, we were talking before, you said that they mailed out ballots in Salt Lake County yesterday, and so anytime in the next couple of days you should start seeing those, right?
Yes, in fact, that was the statutory deadline that we are supposed to only be able to mail ballots 21 days before Election Day. So a lot of voters have been kind of really concerned because they hadn't received their ballots already. And we've been responding that we, by law, are required to mail them out no sooner than 21 days before Election Day, and that was yesterday. So they were mailed yesterday.
And we were talking before as well. You said you've seen a lot of interest from voters in the weeks leading up to the ballots going out. Can you talk a little bit about the registration, traffic, inquiries you've seen, Sherrie?
Oh, the interest and the enthusiasm for this election has been unlike anything I've seen, especially even earlier on. So many new registrations, so many people inquiring about how to register, and it has been amazing. We have currently about 595,000 active registered voters. And just to give you a comparison, on Election Day in 2018, we had 517,000.
Yeah.
So huge increase in just the 2 years.
Justin, does that track with what you're seeing at the state level as well?
Yeah, absolutely. At the state level, we saw 20,000 registered voters in just the last week added to our rolls across the state. And we've seen about 200,000 registered voters since 2018 election. It's really been nonstop throughout this entire year, with the presidential primary in March, with the June primary, and now with this general election. So we have more votes than we've ever had.
Yeah, that's remarkable. I mean, is that going to do you think that's going to translate into high turnout this election, or what do we typically see in a presidential election year?
You know, from a percentage perspective, if we hit the percentages we've seen in the past, and depending how you want to break it down, but I'll just talk about active voters. We had 82% of active voters show up in 2016. So if we match that percentage, we'll have record-breaking turnout from raw numbers, just because we have more voters, there's no question. What really remains to be seen is will we have a record percentage of voters show up? Yeah, and based on what we're hearing, I'll be surprised if we don't.
Yeah. Well, so assuming we got our ballot in the mail now, Sherrie, can you walk me through the process of what every voter needs to make sure they do to make sure that vote gets counted? Because I think that's the big question, right? We want to make sure every vote gets counted. We don't want to have spoiled ballots. Tell us what every voter needs to make sure they do.
So most importantly, they need to sign the affidavit on their return ballot envelope. If they don't sign that, we have to send them a letter telling them that they didn't sign it. We call it a cure letter. So that's the most important thing. They need to use the envelope that has their name on it. They don't want to switch envelopes with someone in the household, because when the ballots come back and that barcode on that return envelope is scanned through our machinery, it attributes that to that voter, and then it pulls up the signature for that particular voter. So that's the most important thing they can do. We have questions about whether if they don't use their security sleeve, their ballot still counts. Yes, it does. They don't have to. That all counties don't even have that. And also, I got a question this morning about whether they have to vote in every contest or if that invalidates their ballot. No, they can vote in whichever contest they want, and we can count the ones that they do.
Okay. Generally speaking, what sort of percentages do we see of ballots that are spoiled in a given election? Either one of you can answer that.
It was in 2018. It was less than 1% that we had to send cure letters for. And I don't know after they responded to the cure letters, because they can still resolve the issue and have the ballot counted. And I'm not sure, Justin, do you know on that?
I do know it's less than 1% of ballots that are ultimately spoiled for some reason or other. So it's a very small percentage.
Okay. There's been a lot of concern and a lot of discussion about get your ballot in the mail early. That's not necessarily as big of an issue here in Utah, right? Justin, can you tell us about when voters need to get their ballots in, and would you recommend that they get them in early regardless?
First off, yes, I would recommend to get them in early for a couple of reasons. One, then the campaigns take you off the list and you don't get all the mailers, and that's pretty great. That's
a relief, yeah.
So there's one benefit of voting early. Two, the more ballots we get earlier, the more election results we'll have on election night, and I think that makes everybody happier. But the reason it's not as big of a deal here in Utah as in some other states is so long as that ballot is postmarked no later than the day before election day, it can be received up through the day before canvass, the official certification of ballots, and still counted. So in most of our large counties, in most counties across the state, that canvass is 2 weeks after election day. So there are really 13 days after election day for that ballot to be received, even with some concerns about delays in mail time, which I don't think we'll see here in Utah. There's plenty of time to get those ballots back.
And just to reiterate, it's got to be postmarked the day before the election, right? That's the last time you can postmark it. You can drop it in a ballot box at the county offices or somewhere on election day. Is that right?
That's right. Until 8 p.m. on election day, you can put that in a Dropbox. And we have more Dropboxes in the state than we've ever had before. We have 160 this year. So there's plenty of locations spread all across the state. Now, I should note, you do want to put it in a Dropbox in your own county. But there's more locations than ever before to drop those off.
And speaking of locations, Sherrie, I guess the Vivint Smart Home Arena, the Utah Jazz have made that available as a polling place. Are we expecting a lot of day of turnout this year?
I'm afraid we may expect more than we would prefer, because the vote centers are really meant for the individuals who did not receive a ballot in the midst of this pandemic. That is so important, because we're having to socially distance the poll workers, the voting machines, and the voters in line. So to put it in perspective, if we have 20 voters in line, we're going to see a line 120 feet long. And this is going to be very difficult if people just go up to vote in person, because they prefer to do that. That's the way it's been in the past, but we are really asking people to use their by-mail ballot so we don't have those long lines occur. And so, yes, the Larry Miller Group reached out to us, offered the Vivint Arena and also their theaters. So we're using some of those. We have some larger venues because of the social distancing requirement and more. But nevertheless, we want people really to use their by-mail ballot and leave the vote centers and in-person voting for those who need to be there.
Yeah, and I understand there have been problems with poll workers. A lot of poll workers are older people, maybe people who aren't necessarily interested in being out there risking contracting COVID because of that. Is that right, Sherrie? Or are you doing okay in terms of poll workers?
Oh, we had so many people volunteer. It was amazing. Everyone wanted to help with this election. So poll workers has not been an issue for us at all. In fact, we had to create a waiting list because we had so many offers. However, again, we don't want to unnecessarily expose those individuals by having more crowds of people. So we have a lot of people as far as volunteers for poll workers. We're training them. Our limitation really is on the poll pads, where people have to sign in. It's their official electronic register. And we only have so many of those. And so, you know, we have to spread those out to the different locations.
Yeah. So is there any benefit, any pros or cons to putting your ballot in the mailbox versus a Dropbox versus delivering it on election day, Justin, or is it all just the same? Are all of them secure? Are all of the ballots going to get to their destination?
Yes, I think all of them are secure. I think there is one benefit to putting it in a Dropbox versus putting it through the postal system, and is that it goes directly to the county clerk if it's in a Dropbox. There's no, you know, post office worker who's going to pick that up and deliver it. County election officials go pick those up. They go straight to the county. Same thing if you drop it off at a polling location, that goes straight to the election officials. So that may be the one benefit of the Dropbox, is it goes straight to them. But any of the methods that are used, it will get back to the election officials and it will be counted.
Okay. So Sherrie, our ballots now arrived at the clerk's office. Can you walk us through the precautions that you guys take, both in verifying the authenticity of the ballot to make sure that there isn't voter fraud, because again, that's a concern, and also talk a little bit about the unusual steps you've had to take because of coronavirus.
So when the ballots come back, they have a unique ID number on the ballot envelope, and that is assigned to each active voter. So ballots are not sent out just without an active voter being assigned that ballot. They come back, the ballots are scanned in, the return envelope is scanned, that barcode on the return envelope is then attributed to that voter having returned their ballot, gives the voter credit in the database that we've received their ballot, and then we go through the process of removing the tab. In our county, we have a tab that covers the signature, and so that's a little laborious, but that tab is then removed, and then they're sent back through the scanning equipment again, and the picture is taken of the signature on that affidavit envelope, and then the equipment we have verifies about 50% of the signatures with software, and we do audits on those constantly to make sure everything's being done correctly with that version. The ones that can't be verified by the software are then done manually. Signature on every envelope is compared to the signature we have for that voter in our signature library. If it doesn't match at that point, we have other passes where we go into documents that we have on file for that voter, and then we can look at other signatures on past registration forms, absentee applications, whatever, and try to match the signature. If it still doesn't match, we send the voter what we call a cure letter. Immediately they're mailed a letter to let them know that there's an issue with their signature, and they can resolve that by responding to that cure letter.
Mm-hmm. And during the primary, correct me if I'm wrong, you had to quarantine ballots for 48 hours or 24 hours before you started counting them too, before you started processing, is that right?
We did quarantine ballots during the primary. However, we've had an update that they probably only need to be quarantined for about 3 hours now. Oh. So it's not 24 hours now.
Good to know. So Justin, Sherrie's talked a little bit about some of the precautions in place to prevent voter fraud. Again, we've been doing vote by mail elections for several cycles now. Do we see voter fraud in vote by mail more than we do in, say, in traditional elections? What is the risk here, and what should people know?
Yeah, that's a great question. We do get a lot of questions about that. We really don't see any increase in we should really say attempts at voter fraud with by mail elections. And I think there's a couple of things to consider. One, even before counties were running elections by mail, we still had a significant number of people voting by mail. These were people requesting absentee ballots, and we had, depending on the county, a quarter to a third of people requesting ballots anyway. And that's actually the area where, if we see any attempts at fraud, it's from similar groups. It's for people who are voting for a student who's away at college and still has their address at home, or a spouse is trying to vote for a spouse or a partner, someone in the same household, and they'll sign the envelope on behalf of that other person and send it in. And we know that's happening because the counties are very good at catching this. And then they'll reach out to the voter, let them know, hey, you can't do that. That's technically a felony if you're trying to vote on behalf of someone else. And then we don't see any repeats from those same people. Yeah. So we're not seeing any significant kind of voter fraud, and any people or any voters, I should say, who are maybe getting confused about signing for someone else are getting educated and not repeating that offense.
Is this, and this is a question that I've kind of wondered about myself, frankly, am I able to take a ballot, my daughter's ballot, my parents' ballot, and drop it off for them, or is that considered ballot harvesting? Is that prohibited?
You can actually do that. We actually passed some legislation in August in the special session to kind of define ballot harvesting a little more clearly. Now, candidates can't do that. You can't go pick up all your neighbors' ballots, but someone in the same household, so family members, that's not a problem to pick up, those few ballots and put them in the Dropbox. Everyone still needs to sign their own ballot. That's important. Or places like a long-term care facility, for example, there's not a problem there with workers collecting a ballot on behalf of someone. But outside of those limited circumstances, we would run into ballot harvesting, and that would be prohibited.
We've got a question online from Jen, and this is actually a really good one I meant to cover earlier. Do we still have time to register to vote? Sherrie, do you want to take that?
Yes, until 5 o'clock on Friday, October 23rd, and that is in order for them to receive a ballot in the mail. There is same-day registration at the vote centers, but that is not an efficient way for people to register, so we don't want them to wait. If they go on election day or even during our early voting period and try to register, we call it same day, that means they would need to fill out a provisional form, which is like a voter registration form. They would have to show ID and proof of residency, and then that ballot would be, or that form would be reviewed to determine whether that ballot can be accepted. So we are encouraging people, if they want to vote in this election, get registered up until 5 o'clock on Friday, October 23rd, and we'll mail you a ballot.
Okay. Justin, we were talking a little bit before about a ballot glitch in San Pete County, and in case we have viewers down there in San Pete County right now, tell us a little bit about what happened there and what you advise that they do about that.
Yeah, this is unfortunate. There was an issue with the print vendor. When they prepared the ballot envelopes, they didn't put a line on where voters sign. Now, as we've talked about, it's very important for voters to sign. That's how we verify that it was that voter who signed their own envelope with their own ballot. So the printer left that off, and voters in San Pete started getting their ballots yesterday. So a couple of things are going to happen. The county clerk is working with the vendor to put out a postcard that will give voters instructions about where they can sign on the envelope and to make sure that is counted, and how they should sign that to get that counted. The other things we have is if someone forgets to sign. Sherrie mentioned these cure letters that go out. The county clerk will reach out to the voters and let them know, hey, you forgot to sign your ballot. Not really your fault. There wasn't a place that said where to sign. And here's what you need to do to cure that. And we actually have a great new platform this year. It's called Text to Cure, where someone can actually go text in, and then it will give them instructions about how they can sign their signature on their phone and get that to the county clerk. They won't even need to use paper or go into the county. So in San Pete County, there's a lot of time to work these issues out, fortunately, although it's unfortunate that this even happened in the first place.
Well, that's an important point that we kind of touched on earlier. If you vote early, then you have an opportunity to cure these ballots if there's any irregularities in it. Justin, tell us a little bit also about tracking your ballot.
Sure. So you can go to vote.utah.gov and put in your information, and it will tell you where your ballot's at in the process. If it's been mailed to you, if the county clerk has received it once you've sent it back in, and then eventually it will tell you when it's been counted. We've heard there are people who, even in past elections, aren't sure if their vote was counted or not, and there's no reason. People can go track that and look at vote.utah.gov and find their information.
Sherrie, this election you've got, certainly in the 4th District in Salt Lake County, that's going to be a hotly contested election. Do you anticipate that there's going to be challenges to ballots, and what options do the campaigns or the parties have to contest a ballot that's being counted or not?
So I'm not sure what the challenges would be as far as to the ballot. I know after Election Day in 2018, we had campaigns actually going out and encouraging people to sign their cure letters if they'd received one and get those back into us. As far as challenges, I don't anticipate that. We had a lot of poll watchers. The only thing we had in 2018 is Mia Love's campaign wanted to have a say in the signatures that were verified and actually stand there and weigh in. And if you can imagine the chaos that would have created if you had both candidates or campaigns looking over the shoulders of the people doing the signature verification, the judge dismissed that. It was not a help.
You guys could kind of emphasize the sort of the lengthy process that these ballots go through. I mean, even once they receive the verification of it, what should we expect on election night? Are we going to have half of the results, 2/3 of the results? What do you anticipate that we'll see? What do you anticipate we'll know on election night?
I think, and we've seen this in previous by-mail elections, we generally have about 75% of the results on election night, sometimes more. And that depends how many people send their ballots in early versus how many people show up to drop them off on election day. Unless it's a very close race, we usually have a pretty good indication of where things are at on election night. There's not a lot of change as we get to the final certification. Now, that being said, if it's a close race, it's going to take perhaps 2 weeks to get those final results. We saw that, with the 4th Congressional District in 2018 and probably 16. The 4th Congressional has always been close. Or we'll have some legislative races that may be very close, and we'll watch for those couple of weeks. But it's important to note that we do release results on a rolling basis. So we release on the election night starting at 8 p.m. But then every day the county clerks count ballots, we put out new updated results.
And that's a change. Before it was Tuesdays and Thursdays, I believe, that you were doing it. Now it's every day, right? Yeah,
we've had a few changes. In early vote by mail, we actually had a blackout period. We released results on election night and then nothing until the canvass 2 weeks later. And that, of course, drove everybody crazy. And so the legislature passed a law that said, we release every day it's counted. The law actually hasn't changed. But we worked with the counties and said, well, let's do it on Tuesdays and Fridays, and then at least we'll know what's going on. But as races have gotten, in some cases very close, we've just realized it makes sense to do it every day. So there will be updates from some county at least every day.
Yeah. I wrote a piece the other day that this will be the first time we don't have a straight party ticket box on our ballot. They got rid of that. And one of the things I like about that with the vote by mail is you can sit down with your ballot and study the candidates and look at the issues, look at the constitutional amendments. We've got several on the ballot this time, obviously. Justin and Sherrie, can you tell us a little bit about the resources that people can go to if they want to learn a little bit more about some of these issues that maybe the constitutional amendments, for example, that don't maybe get as much attention as some of the others?
Justin, if you want to talk about your voter information pamphlet, that's a great resource.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, people should be sick of hearing me say this this season, but vote.utah.gov, and I'll be the non-stop commercial. Vote.utah.gov, if you put in your information, it will show you exactly what's on your ballot. You'll get a sample ballot that's what's on your ballot, all of your races, and the constitutional amendments. We've got 7 of them this year, and that's a lot. It's the most I could find on a ballot in the last 40 years. But there's an opportunity, and it really is a great thing with vote by mail. If you show up in a polling location and get hit with 7 constitutional amendments, it's kind of hard to make a call on some of those right off the bat. With vote by mail, you do have the time to look them up, see the pro and con statements that are out there, see how the legislature voted on it, and that gives you a more informed decision.
We also have the judicial performance evaluation, and that's very informative. There's a link on our website, got-vote.org, and they can select that or the state's voter information pamphlet. But a lot of people don't know about the retention of the judges, and so this is good information for them to find and use that.
Yeah, that's a great one. We're about to wrap up here. I appreciate you guys taking the time to talk to me. Any last thoughts before we go? Justin, you can go first.
Sure. I'll just reiterate some of what Sherrie said earlier. We want to encourage everybody to vote. And in this year with the pandemic, we want to encourage everyone to do it safely. So vote that by mail ballot, put it in a Dropbox, put it in the mail. But really, unless you absolutely have to go, don't go to the polling locations. Voting by mail is convenient and it's safe. So everybody vote and everybody vote safely.
And Sherrie, you can have the last word.
And absolutely, I reiterate what Justin says, and if they return their ballots sooner rather than later, that helps us. For instance, we received over 90,000 ballots on election day in 2018 and 110,000 on election day in 2016. We cannot get all those processed and verified and get them in the election night results, needless to say. So if they would send their ballots back whether it's Dropbox or by mail sooner, that would help us get them into the election night results.
Okay. Well, there you have it. Your ballot should be showing up in the next day or two. It sounds like there's a process in place to make sure that these are delivered safely, that they're validated, that they're checked to make sure they're authentic, and get them in early. Get those ballots in early so we can get some good results on election night, and so we don't have to worry about showing up on voting in person on election day. So thank you guys so much for taking the time to talk to me. I'm sure we'll talk again between now and November 3rd and thereafter. So thanks for joining us on Trib Talk.
Hey, thank you.